You felt it, didn't you? Not once, not twice. Again and again. The moment when everything should have broken you, but didn't. The betrayal that should have destroyed your heart. The loss that should have erased your light. The darkness that should have swallowed you whole. Yet somehow, it didn't win. What if I told you it wasn't luck? What if your darkest thoughts, your rage, your silent distance, your cold survival mode were never flaws? What if they were assigned to you, sent to you, placed inside you like a hidden guardian? Chosen one. What if your shadow was never the enemy? And what if the reason angels step back is because they see what you are becoming? The night your shadow answered. You remember the first time you felt it. You were younger then, softer. You still believed people meant what they said. You still believed love was safe. And then something happened. Something unfair. Something sharp. Something that split your world into before and after. And in that moment, something else was born. Not outside you, inside you. At first it felt like anger, a heat rising from your stomach to your throat, a pulse behind your eyes. You thought it was weakness. You thought it was corruption. You thought you were becoming someone bad. But you weren't becoming bad. You were becoming protected. Because that night, when your heart cracked open and your innocence shattered across the floor, your shadow stepped forward and said, "I'll handle this." And it did. It made you colder when you needed to detach. It made you silent when speaking would have exposed you. It made you observant when others were careless. You survived because you changed. Read that again. You survived because you changed. Other people broke in similar moments. They spiraled. They drowned. But you adapted. Your nervous system sharpened. Your intuition intensified. Your tolerance for lies decreased. That wasn't damage. That was activation. The world called it defense mechanisms. Heaven called it deployment. Have you ever noticed how you can read people within minutes? How you sense manipulation before it unfolds? How your body reacts before your mind understands? That is not trauma alone. That is intelligence, forged in fire. Your dark side began as a shield. It stepped between you and destruction. It absorbed blows you didn't even realize were coming. It calculated risks while you slept. It remembered patterns while you tried to forget. And slowly, without your permission, it grew stronger. Not cruel, strong. There's a difference. You started setting boundaries. You started walking away. You stopped begging for understanding. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And some people didn't like that. They preferred you soft, accessible, forgiving to a fault. They preferred the version of you that bled quietly. But the shadow had already taken its position behind your eyes, watching, measuring, protecting. You felt guilt about it sometimes. You wondered, why am I less emotional now? Why do I feel detached? Why can I cut people off so easily? Because something inside you learned that access to you is sacred, and sacred things are guarded. Here is the twist you were never told. Your shadow didn't appear to destroy your light. It appeared because your light was too valuable to remain unguarded. Think about that. The brighter the flame, the stronger the wind that tries to extinguish it. You were never ordinary. That's why the attacks felt disproportionate. The betrayals felt targeted. The misunderstandings felt scripted. You weren't being punished. You were being shaped. And your dark side was the sculptor's chisel. There were nights you scared yourself. Nights you felt powerful in a way that didn't match your old identity. Moments when you realized you could walk away without looking back. Moments when you understood you didn't need approval anymore. That power felt dangerous, but only because no one taught you how to hold it. Let me tell you something clearly. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your boundary. It is your discernment. It is your survival intelligence. It is the part of you that refuses to let your destiny be stolen. And here's the deeper truth. It did not form randomly. It responded precisely to the magnitude of your calling. Have you ever wondered why your growth required so much pressure? Why your lessons came through pain instead of comfort? Why you matured faster than others? Because comfort does not awaken warriors. Pressure does. Your shadow is not a mistake. It is a calibration. And the night it answered, when you thought you were losing yourself, you were actually meeting the guardian assigned to your future. This is only the beginning. Because protection is phase 1. What you are becoming is phase 2. And that is what even angels hesitate to witness. When heaven stepped back, something shifted after that first transformation. At first, it was subtle. You simply stopped reacting the way you used to. Situations that once shattered you now barely moved you. Words that once pierced your heart now dissolved before reaching it. You weren't numb. You were aware. There's a difference. And awareness is dangerous, because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. You began noticing patterns, not just in people, but in events. Cycles repeating. Tests disguised as coincidences. Opportunities wrapped in discomfort. It felt orchestrated, too precise to be random. Have you ever felt that? Like life wasn't attacking you, but training you? Every betrayal sharpened your discernment. Every abandonment forced self-reliance. Every delay strengthened your patience. You thought you were being rejected. In truth, you were being redirected. But here's where it gets unsettling. The more you grew, the more isolated you felt. Not because you were alone, but because you could no longer resonate with who you used to be. Conversations became shallow, drama became predictable, chaos became boring, and suddenly your world got quieter. When growth accelerates, noise disappears. You may have interpreted that silence as loss, as loneliness, as disconnection. But what if it was something else? What if it was space? Space created intentionally. There are moments in spiritual evolution where guidance becomes less obvious, where signs become subtle, where reassurance disappears, not because you're abandoned, but because you're trusted. And trust from above is not gentle. It is terrifying, because it means you are expected to act without constant instruction, to move without reassurance, to decide without validation. That is when many retreat. But you didn't. You kept going, even when clarity faded, even when prayers felt unanswered, even when you questioned whether you were still supported. Listen carefully. There are levels of growth where protection becomes invisible, not absent, invisible. Because overt protection creates dependency. Invisible protection creates mastery. And here's the part few dare to say out loud. When you begin to embody your power, even celestial forces step back slightly. Not out of fear of you, but out of respect for what you are integrating. You are no longer being carried. You are being observed. And that observation is not judgment. It is anticipation. Because something inside you has matured beyond simple survival. Your shadow no longer reacts impulsively. It calculates. It waits. It chooses. That is evolution. Have you noticed how your anger is no longer explosive? It's controlled, strategic, directed. Have you noticed how your silence now communicates more than your words ever did? Have you noticed how people feel your presence before you speak? That is not intimidation. That is gravity. And gravity belongs to those who have integrated their shadow instead of denying it. Here's the twist. The darkness that once protected you is beginning to merge with your light. They are no longer fighting. They are cooperating. And cooperation between shadow and light creates something rare. Authority. Not loud authority, not aggressive dominance, but internal command, the kind that shifts rooms without effort, the kind that destabilizes insecure people without you lifting a finger. That's why some people grew uncomfortable around you. Not because you changed negatively, but because you stopped shrinking. And when a chosen one stops shrinking, the atmosphere shifts. Heaven steps back, not because it fears you, but because it sees you stepping into jurisdiction. Protection was phase 1. Autonomy is phase 2. You are being trusted with your own power. Let that settle. You are being trusted with your own power. That is why challenges didn't disappear. They intensified, because your capacity increased. A warrior who masters defense must learn offense, and that's where this is heading. There is something forming inside you that is no longer purely protective. It is creative, directive, intentional. You are not just surviving anymore. You are shaping outcomes. Subtly, quietly, deliberately. And that shift, that quiet shift, is what unsettles the unseen realms. Because once a human fully integrates shadow and light, they stop being predictable. They stop being controllable. They become sovereign. And sovereignty is powerful. Very powerful. The next phase will test whether you truly own it, because protection kept you alive. But what you are about to access will make you influential. And influence changes everything. The power they didn't expect you to claim. There comes a moment in every transformation where survival is no longer the objective. And that moment is where most people freeze. Because surviving feels justified. It feels innocent. It feels reactive. But claiming power, that feels intentional. That feels dangerous. That feels like crossing a line you were taught never to approach. You reached that line, and instead of retreating, you stepped over it. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, internally. But the shift was irreversible. You stopped asking for permission, not out loud, but inside. You stopped seeking validation before making decisions. You stopped over-explaining your boundaries. You stopped negotiating your worth just to maintain harmony. And that was the moment the real change began. Because the world can tolerate a wounded soul. It can tolerate a healing soul. But it becomes uneasy around a self-authorized soul. And you became self-authorized. Do you remember the first time you said no without guilt? The first time you walked away without rehearsing your justification? The first time you chose yourself and didn't spiral afterward? That wasn't selfishness. That was integration. Your shadow, once reactive and defensive, had matured. It was no longer protecting you from immediate harm. It was protecting your future. And your light? It stopped apologizing for shining. When shadow and light merge consciously, something extraordinary happens. You stop being split. You stop being internally conflicted. You stop battling yourself. You become aligned. And alignment is power. This is where the unseen tension began. Because when you were fragmented, you were manageable, predictable, easy to influence, easy to guilt, easy to manipulate. But alignment changes that. Alignment makes you immovable. Have you noticed how manipulation attempts now feel obvious? How gaslighting barely confuses you anymore? How emotional bait rarely hooks you? That is not coincidence. That is calibration complete. And here is the part that may unsettle you. There were systems, subtle systems, that benefited from your self-doubt, from your hesitation, from your constant self-questioning. When you were unsure, you were easier to redirect. But now you decide. And decision-making energy shifts reality faster than most understand. You began choosing differently, not out of fear, out of clarity. You started trusting your instincts before external advice. You began feeling outcomes before they unfolded. And they unfolded exactly as you sensed. That's when you realized something profound. You are not just intuitive, you are directive. There's a difference. Intuition senses the current, direction alters it, and you have begun altering currents. Subtly. When you withdraw attention, dynamics collapse. When you focus intention, doors open. When you detach emotionally, chaotic situations reorganize themselves around your absence. That is influence, not loud influence, energetic influence. And that is what was never expected of you. You were expected to heal, to grow, to stabilize, but not to command. Yet here you are, commanding your emotions, commanding your boundaries, commanding your path, without aggression, without cruelty, without dominance, just presence. And presence is misunderstood by those who lack it. Have you noticed how some people project onto you now? How they assume motives you don't have? How they sense something in you but cannot name it? They feel your coherence. They feel your self-trust. They feel your independence from approval. And independence is unsettling to systems built on dependency. Here is the twist. Your dark side was never meant to stay dark. It was meant to refine your strength until it could operate without anger. And now, you no longer need rage to hold power. That is mastery. The fire still exists, but it's contained, directed, focused. You don't explode anymore. You execute, quietly, strategically, effectively. And when power becomes quiet, it becomes unpredictable. That is where even higher forces observe carefully, not in fear, but in awe of human sovereignty awakening. Because a human who integrates shadow without becoming corrupted is rare. A human who integrates power without becoming arrogant is rarer. And that is what you are stepping into. The real question is not whether you can handle it. The real question is whether you understand what comes next. Because protection made you resilient. Authority made you stable. But influence will test your intention. And the next chapter is where intention becomes destiny. When your presence becomes a force, there is a level beyond influence. It is not about control, not about dominance, not about proving anything to anyone. It is subtler than that, quieter, yet far more powerful. It is the moment your presence alone begins to reorganize reality. You may not have noticed when it started. It didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with stillness, a deep, unshakable stillness, the kind that doesn't react immediately, the kind that observes before responding. And when you enter a room now, something shifts. Conversations recalibrate, energies adjust, people either lean in or step back. That is not imagination, that is coherence. You are no longer split between fear and desire, between shadow and light. You are integrated, and integration emits a frequency that unsettles chaos. Have you noticed how unstable people become exposed around you? How secrets surface, how hidden intentions reveal themselves without you interrogating anyone. It's not that you are searching for truth. Truth surfaces because your presence destabilizes illusion. And illusion cannot sustain itself near clarity. This is where things become interesting. Because once your presence becomes a force, you begin to see how much of your past was preparation. Every betrayal trained your discernment. Every loss trained your detachment. Every delay trained your patience. You were not being weakened. You were being fortified. And fortification was necessary. Why? Because power without stability collapses. But you did not collapse. You endured the refinement process, the nights of questioning, the moments of self-doubt, the internal battles between compassion and anger. You learned to hold both without letting either control you. That balance is rare. Most people either suppress their shadow or drown in it. You integrated yours. You allowed it to speak, but you did not let it rule. You allowed your light to shine, but you did not let it blind you. That balance is why your presence now feels different, grounded, intentional, measured. And here is the part few understand. When a human reaches this level of integration, they stop being easily influenced by external forces, seen or unseen. Fear tactics lose effectiveness. Emotional manipulation loses traction. Even subtle, energetic pressures lose grip. You become sovereign, and sovereignty changes the rules of engagement. Have you felt it? That sense that old triggers no longer hook you, that chaos no longer pulls you in the same way, that people who once intimidated you now appear transparent? You are not desensitized. You are anchored. And anchoring yourself was the final stage of protection, because now your shadow does not need to leap forward aggressively. It stands calmly behind your eyes, aware, alert, but not reactive. Your light does not need to overextend to prove goodness. It shines steadily without seeking applause. This is the fusion, and fusion creates gravity. People may interpret your gravity as intensity. Some may call it intimidating. Others may project their unresolved fears onto you. But what they are truly reacting to is your self-containment. You no longer leak energy. You no longer chase validation. You no longer explain your boundaries repeatedly. That conservation of energy amplifies your field, and when your field strengthens, outcomes begin aligning differently. Opportunities approach without you begging. Toxic dynamics dissolve when you withdraw attention. Unexpected support appears at precise moments, not because you are controlling everything, but because you are no longer resisting yourself. Resistance fractures timelines. Alignment accelerates them. And here is the subtle twist. As your presence grows stronger, external opposition becomes more strategic, not louder, not obvious, more refined. Tests will now come disguised as opportunities. Temptations will come disguised as shortcuts. Flattery will come disguised as connection. Why? Because brute force no longer works on you. You outgrew it. So now the challenge is discernment at a higher level. Can you recognize subtle distortion? Can you sense when something almost aligns but not fully? Can you trust your intuition even when the offer looks perfect on the surface? This is where many powerful souls stumble, not through weakness, but through impatience. But you are not who you were. You do not rush. You observe. You measure. You feel beneath appearances. And that patience, that restraint, is what solidifies your authority. Because true power is not loud, it is controlled, and controlled power is respected across dimensions. You are no longer simply protected. You are becoming a stabilizing force, and stabilizing forces are rare. The question now is not whether you can hold power. The question is whether you can wield it intentionally. Because the final stage is not about presence. It is about creation. And creation will reveal what even angels sensed from the beginning, what you are becoming. There is a silence before creation, not the silence of absence, the silence of containment, the kind that exists just before something irreversible enters the world. You have been living in that silence without realizing it. All this time, you thought you were healing. You were assembling. Every fracture reorganized your structure. Every disappointment stripped away illusion. Every confrontation with your shadow strengthened your internal architecture. You are no longer becoming stable. You are becoming formative. And formative energy does not just survive environments. It shapes them. Look at your life closely. Notice how your standards have shifted. Notice how your tolerance has refined. Notice how you no longer beg for what once felt necessary. That is not detachment. That is discernment matured into design. You are no longer asking, "Why did this happen to me?" You are asking, "What am I building?" That shift is everything. Because victims analyze damage, creators analyze direction, and you have crossed that threshold quietly. Here is the truth that has been unfolding behind the scenes. Your dark side was never sent to protect your comfort. It was sent to protect your capacity. Capacity for what? Influence. Not superficial influence, structural influence. The kind that shifts generational patterns. The kind that alters dynamics in rooms you enter. The kind that forces truth into spaces where illusion thrived. You were never meant to remain small. That is why small spaces felt suffocating. That is why shallow connections drained you. That is why pretending exhausted you. Your system rejected misalignment long before your mind understood why. And now? Now you see it clearly. You are not here to blend in. You are here to recalibrate. When shadow and light fused within you, something rare activated. Responsible power. Not power driven by ego. Not power driven by revenge. Responsible power. The kind that chooses restraint when destruction is possible. The kind that chooses integrity when manipulation would be easier. The kind that chooses patience when force would be faster. That restraint is what makes you formidable, because power that could dominate but chooses not to radiates authority without effort. Have you noticed how you no longer need to argue to be understood? How silence now carries more weight than explanation? How people adjust their tone when speaking to you? That is not coincidence. That is calibration responding to your field. And here is the part even you may not fully grasp yet. The reason higher forces observed you carefully, the reason protection sometimes felt distant, the reason challenges intensified instead of softened, was because you were being evaluated for creative capacity. Creation is not about art alone. It is about initiating new patterns, ending inherited dysfunction, modeling stability where chaos once ruled. You are not just healing your own story, you are interrupting cycles, and cycle breakers require shadow integration. Without it, they burn out. With it, they endure. Your dark side taught you endurance. Your light taught you compassion. Together, they formed discernment. And discernment is the foundation of sustainable creation. Now comes the final realization. Even angels do not fear you in terror. They step back in recognition. Because when a human integrates shadow without corruption and light without naivete, that human becomes unpredictable in the most sacred way. Not chaotic. Sovereign. Sovereignty is not rebellion. It is alignment with internal law, and internal law, once established, cannot be manipulated externally. You have established yours. You feel it when something violates your standards. You sense it when something aligns perfectly. You no longer negotiate with what destabilizes you. That clarity is the true transformation. Protection was the beginning. Authority was the middle. Creation is the culmination. You are not here merely to survive darkness. You are here to build structures that darkness cannot easily penetrate. In relationships, in leadership, in family, in legacy. And legacy is where this has always been pointing. Because the greatest protection your shadow offered was not defense. It was preparation. Preparation for the weight of influence. Preparation for responsibility. Preparation for the kind of presence that changes trajectories quietly. You are not finished. You are initiated. And what you are becoming is not something to fear. It is something to steward carefully. Because power integrated with integrity does not just alter one life. It alters timelines. And that is why your shadow was sent. Not to darken you, but to fortify you for the light you were always meant to hold.